Oh, it's tough to be right. 1 week ago today, I made a prediction on the Malamut program. We'll get to that. We told you it would be, in fact, Brexit, that they would not stay, and that's exactly how it went. And Chuck will debrief what that has meant ever since, although I think today is going to be Recovery Day around the world and especially here in the United States. I think we're going to have a good day. But we'll get to Chuck on all of that. You're about to listen to Chuck Malamut in a weekly program that we do with the official advisor, financial advisor to the Hurley in the Morning program in our 26th year together here on the Hurley in the Morning program. Started July 1st, our anniversary right around the corner in just a few days. Chuck leads his group, the Malamut Group, at Morgan Stanley's Northfield office. To reach them for all of your financial planning needs, call 609-383-2010, 609-383-2010. And the program that you're about to listen to, I promise you it will be melodious. It is presented by Chuck Malamut, who is a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley. The information, views, and opinions expressed on this weekly program are those of Chuck. They do not necessarily reflect those of Morgan Stanley or its affiliates. They are current as of the date of today's broadcast, subject to change without notice. Neither the information provided nor any opinion expressed herein constitutes a solicitation for the purchase of a sale of any security. This presentation is for informational purposes only. Morgan Stanley, Smith Barney, member SIPC. Chuck, a whole lot to talk about. How are you?
Good morning, Harry.
You want a little more juice in your headset, a little less? You good?
You
good to go?
We're a little bit more would be good.
A little more? How about that?
That is perfect. Thank you.
Welcome. Welcome home, Chuck. Good to see you. Your brother Harry did confidently predict, not only last week, but in the entire run-up, even when the numbers were going the other way. And to any of our listeners, please check out my column. It's online at shorenewstoday.com. If you go to my Twitter feed, it's there as well. Shore News Today tweeted it out yesterday. I tell you exactly why this vote went the way that it did. There was a demarcation line that happened in April, and it crushed the entire question right there in its tracks. And it's to me, it's empirical, the way that we break down what happened. It actually should not have happened. This question should not have gone the way that it did. Read my column, and you'll learn why. We don't have the time to break that down here on Chuck's program. But, Chuck, I think it is an important place to start the program because obviously last Friday the Dow was down over 600 points. All of our indices were down. The world markets were plummeting. And this was all a direct, I think, hyper-emotional reaction to the United Kingdom voting to leave the European Union.
You know, Harry, when we take a step back and actually watched the election as it results as they unfolded, what was interesting is around 8 p.m. our time, the futures were down about 400 as the results were starting to come in. And we got to the point, I'm going to say maybe within a half an hour, 45 minutes later, the futures then flipped pretty much upside down where we were almost dead even as a result of the vote sort of swinging in the other direction in favor of staying and not leaving. And that remained in place for the better part of maybe 20 minutes, a half an hour, and then, virtually from that point forward, as we got later into the evening, and I remember, unfortunately, I was up till about 2 a.m., watching as that 52 to 48 came in, knowing full well that the Asian markets were in the midst of a sell-off, which then, you said that contagion across the world into Europe and then ultimately to the U.S. down 600 plus, going into the weekend. Everyone had an opportunity to sort of, rethink, what the actual impact is going to be. Opening up Monday yesterday in the Far East, actually, those markets did relatively well. Then coming back into Europe with another sell-off, and then ultimately the end result yesterday was down 250, down 260 in the Dow roughly. Got off the mat a little bit because we were off in excess of 300. And now when we look today, as you indicated, the futures are up. But the question is, we put in the worst 2 days back to back that we've had virtually since last August. And if you remember last August, the market was in really, really disrepair. But in reality, Harry, as we got to the run-up to the election, about 2 weeks out, the markets had sold off. And then, as you know, in Britain...
But in the 2 weeks before, the markets were bracing for this question to fail.
Yeah, so 2 weeks out, the markets had sold off under the thought process that
that they would remain.
Exit, that there would be an exit. And then it flipped about a week out where the markets thought, and the bookmakers in the UK were thinking that all indications were that they would stay. And then so actually what happened was over that 2 week period of time, the market had run up and then had gone down, ran back up, and then ultimately sold off. So I think what you really need to take a look at is, how have we fared, year to date, with all this anxiety out there. So, going into yesterday, the S&P was actually up 0.8%. So we gave back a fair amount of that yesterday. So I think, for lack of better words, Harry, we could say that we're basically dead even here, with a lot of very, very anxious moments. I mean, the banks in the UK, and as you know, I can't really name them, but it's not hard to figure out. But not only did the U.S., big money center banks come under a lot of pressure, but the banks that are domiciled, in the UK with their headquarters there, came under attack, down anywhere from 40 to 50% of their market value within 2 days. I mean, that, in our world, unfortunately, what happens with a lot of momentum trading and a lot of the hedge funds and the institutional trading is it's shoot now, ask questions later.
Yeah,
and I think that's what happened as we got into Friday, ultimately into Monday. And the question is, well, is it over? You never know. You never know until you sort of look backwards.
There's also little X factors, unknowns. This can take a number of years to actually leave. Some are trying to pressure for them to leave right away. Some are pressuring. There's already petitions on the street that because there was supposedly an agreement, if this didn't get a certain percentage of the turnout, which was supposed to be 75%, and that would trigger that the result would stand, or that you would need a certain percent of the vote, and they wanted it to be over, I think, either over 55% or over 60% of the vote, one way or the other, and that the one question would have finality. The truth is, it was 52-48. It did not meet that threshold, and the vote turnout was a little over 72%. It did not meet the 75% threshold. So supposedly, when the Prime Minister Cameron agreed to do this, because he didn't have to do this, he took a shot. I think he thought he could win it. He put his entire government on the line. And I knew that morning at 3:25 a.m., when I was here in studio and listening to his speech, I knew as he was saying the words he was saying that somewhere in that speech he was going to announce that he was leaving himself. The only thing I didn't know, would he leave right away or would he ramp it in a way that I think the way he did it was best. He said, I'm going to stay for 3 months and there'll be a new prime minister and all of that. But I'm not ruling out the possibility. It's not getting a lot of wide coverage, Chuck, but I'm not ruling out the possibility there could be a second question.
Harry, I think that's highly doubtful from everything that I'm seeing and reading. The vote was cast, the decision was made, by the general populations within those particular countries that they wanted to go. Now the problem is when you take countries that wanted to stay,
and they're trying to seek
now they're part of the group that is now leaving. I mean, think
by
about
the way,
it.
Some of them voted over 60%.
We have never ever seen this.
Yeah.
I mean, so this is groundbreaking. Now, unfortunately, because we haven't seen it, and the fact that a lot of the firms, including ours, are downgrading the growth or the lack of or upgrading the lack of growth in the UK. The fact that late yesterday and early today, Moody's and S&P have downgraded government debt and are down and now will be downgrading or have downgraded debt. For the banks that are domiciled there. They're basically saying, hey, 2017, don't be at all surprised if we not here, but if the UK ends up in some sort of recession, and it just. Look, life is all about timing, Harry, as you know, and I think that when you take a look at why did they vote to leave? I think there's basically three different reasons why that 72% showed up and over 52% of them voted to say, hey, it's time to make a change. Now I know that I read your column. And and you focused pretty much exclusively on our current president, and
that is because the media in the United Kingdom did.
Yes,
They did not take kindly to an American president coming in and threatening the United Kingdom that if you don't stay, you go to the back of the queue. We even use words that they use. We use the term back of the line here. He used a British term, back of the queue, poked them in the eye. And then said such things as no trading with you for 5 or 10 years and other incendiary language. And the media in the United Kingdom crushed him. Every poll, 4 of them, they're unreliable typically, but every poll that came out after the April visit by the president and his speech and his joint press conference with the prime minister, every poll turned negative. And he delivered. He's not to blame for everything, but he delivered the fact that they're leaving. Just like 52,000 guns are bought a day in America because of what he says. The exact opposite of what he wants to see happens here. The exact opposite of what he wanted to see happen there happened there. And it is his approach. It is his style. And I don't know what these 3 things that you're going to say is the reason, but I just told you the reason.
So from what we can surmise, here's what happened. Obviously, the way government operates, believe it or not, is different than the way over there than it is here. There was a lot of concern that the EU bureaucrats, continue to micromanage the businesses that were within the UK.
Chuck, do me a big favor, so you don't get we don't mess up the next segment by going too long in the first segment. We're right at the first break.
All right, let's take it and we'll come back.
We'll come right back. Chuck will cite the 3 reasons. Chuck, is one of them the immigration that's happening? Is that one of the 3?
Yes, that's one of the 3.
Okay, because that's a big part of my column as well. That is an extremely undeniable part of why this went down. In fact, it could have survived Obama's poor performance without the immigration invasion issue, because that is what also put this thing negative-wise over the top. Back in just a moment with Chuck Malamut. This portion of our program brought to us in part by Harbor Pines Golf Club, the official golf club to the Hurley in the Morning program, to the Hurley in the Morning Charity Golf Open. They're at 500 St. Andrews Drive in Egg Harbor Township. They do a great job. They're owned by the legendary Gerwicks family. And let me take a moment and share with you Fridays at Harbor Pines this summer season, just awesome. Become a part of summer happy hours. The deck is open. Live entertainment, $5, $4, $2 beverages, $25 8-ounce Maine lobster tail dinner, and 9-hole golf rate after 4 p.m. for only $25. It's happening at the Harbor Pines Golf Club on the World Wide Web at harborpines.com, and certainly feel free to call 609-927-0006 to reserve. One last favor, tell them Hurley in the Morning sent you to Harbor Pines Golf Club in Egg Harbor Township, 500 St. Andrews Drive, owned by the legendary Gerwicks family. Back in 60 seconds more with the talented, the official financial advisor to the Hurley in the Morning program for more than 25 years. To reach the Malamut Group, Chuck is the managing director, the leader of the Malamut Group at Morgan Stanley's Northfield office. For all of your financial planning needs, 609-383-2010 is Chuck's hotline, 609-383-2010. Welcome back. 22 minutes past the hour. It's Hurley in the Morning, WPG, 104.1. We're still on the AM band at 1450, and we're worldwide at WPGTalkRadio.com. It's our weekly visit with Chuck Malamut. This has been our Tuesday morning, 8 o'clock hour for more than 25 years, the official financial advisor to the Hurley in the Morning program, to the Hurley in the Morning charity, and to Harry Hurley, Chuck Malamut and his group. Coming up at 8:50 after the 8:45 break, Chuck will be with us until then. Tim Mooney will be with us to talk about an upcoming charity event that I think I've committed that it's happening on July 9th, but it is in the very near future. And, Chuck, part of our discussion, I don't want to get too far ahead, is we're going to talk about the annual predictions now that we're at the halfway point, because you're my expert. I rely on what you say, but I will say in advance of that segment, which will come up next, is that after we finish this thought that we left the break with, the three reasons why Chuck believes that the United Kingdom left the European Union. The thing I want to share is the fact that experts, not my expert, but experts are saying that what has now happened over the first 6 months, and of course including Friday and Monday of this month, means that we will be negative for the year. I'm going to be very curious to hear what Chuck has to say about that. That's what I've been hearing in the past 12 to 24 hours. That it's
negative in the equity markets you're referring to? Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, Harry, we were barely treading water as we got into the vote. Right now, on a day-to-day basis, the market's up, the market's down for the year. So I think there's a couple things that we need to really focus on, and we'll come back to the EU in a second. The fact that second quarter earnings are going to start very, very quickly, with Alcoa typically being the first, coming right after the holiday, shortly thereafter. And all the predictions that have been put in are saying that Q2, 3, and 4 are going to be substantially better than what we went through Q1, which was basically the trough with respect to earnings. Now, think about the timing of last week's vote. We were virtually at the end of the quarter, so particularly with the financials, everything was in the book, so to speak, for Q2. And then as we get into Q3 and 4, there is a possibility that we could end up with sub-marginal growth, if any growth whatsoever. But so let's take a step back here. And before the break, we kind of chatted about there's three basic reasons that we think that happened here with respect to the voters. One, the concern that the bureaucrats that represent the EU have micromanaged the UK businesses for quite some time through overregulation.
I totally agree.
Probably overregulate. You look about the regs here; it's actually worse there.
Totally agree with that. That's one. Totally agree.
That leads ultimately to job destruction and slow business expansion, if no business expansion. You highlighted about what is happening with respect to immigration. I mean, imagine living, Harry, through what happened in Paris and Brussels with respect to the terrorist attacks, and that the bureaucrats within the EU were unable or maybe even unwilling.
By the way, you say imagine like we can't imagine San Bernardino and everywhere else. We can imagine.
Well, but it just seems like it seems to be more concentrated in Europe than what we've seen here in the U.S. But your point's very well taken. So basically, the bureaucrats have been either unable or unwilling to vet the immigrants and screen out all the terrorists, and then ultimately, what Britons are very, very concerned about is unnecessary laws and regulations that have eroded the national sovereignty. So I think. When you look at those three reasons to go.
By the way, it is funny how all the professionals are ignoring the fact that the President of the United States made a decision to go.
That has not been.
Well, it's not in year three. It's not in year three.
But Harry,
wait, let me finish. It's not in year three, and it's not in any of the media reports. Nobody's reporting what a disaster his trip was to the United Kingdom and how every poll went south since the time that he said what he said. But I know it's politically correct to
I have
ignore
seen it, so it hasn't been ignored, but it hasn't been at the forefront.
Okay, it's not widely reported.
Okay, I think that's better.
I'll concede less than non-reported, but certainly not a major emphasis.
Yeah. So now you have a situation that we've never lived through. And so, as I said earlier, what the market does, it shoots first and asks questions later. So, you had wave upon wave upon wave of selling, but it was orderly. It wasn't.
Right.
If you go back to last August, where we had the issues with the ETFs and unable to match trades off very, very quickly, and when the market went down by 1,000 points within minutes. What we witnessed over the last several days, you don't like to lose. There's no doubt about it, unless you're on the other side, other side of the trade.
Chuck, is it fair to say that at least it's a possibility? I would sense that it's more than a possibility. It's a reality, but certainly it would make it at least a possibility or even a probability that people in different nations, and I would particularly highlight free nations, are sick and tired of globalization, and that they feel that they're not getting a fair shake, and that the rules are not good. They're not good for their nation, and not just the go-it-alone strategy, but the desire to want to take back some sovereignty from the ever-expanding encroachment of globalization that is largely behind a lot of this right now.
Harry, your point is very well taken, and
there was a world before the EU, Chuck. Like leaving the EU, you say it's uncharted. Well, it's uncharted since there was an EU.
That's correct. Now, and it's been
a world before the EU.
I think if I remember correctly, it's been 47 years.
Yeah.
So it's a new world for all of us.
Yeah, but hundreds of years and beyond when it wasn't that, when it was more free trade, and so I don't think they made a terrible decision. I think that maybe it's initial pain before gain. But I think they went in eyes open. Now, obviously, Scotland wanted to stay, and if you look and break it down in quadrants, I guess there were 5 different voting, areas. United Kingdom voted to stay, or actually to leave, rather. And these other nations, several of them, probably a majority of the nations, voted that they wanted to leave, but they're united. They're the United Kingdom, so it's just like here in America. You can't say, hey, I won everywhere except California and New York, and say I really won. You got to base it on the whole thing. And so I think they went into it knowing that the world was going to trash them and look at this crazy thing, and markets are going to tumble and all that. But I think that the markets will catch their breath.
I think, Harry, what the UK has to be very, very concerned about is going into a recession as a result of the vote,
which I think will happen.
The number of jobs that will be leaving, and there's been a lot of discussion around financial services, in particular in the financial district. By
the way, the pound is on par with the dollar now, right?
No, what happened was, Harry, the pound about a week out prior to the vote was trading at about 1.45. Okay. As we got up to the vote the evening of, the pound traded as high as 1.50. Then, as the vote unfolded and the votes were counted, the pound went through basically a major sell-off, and then moved to about 1.30 very, very quickly. And the pound was trading at, if I read correctly, like at 3-decade low. It has since rebounded somewhat, and as we talk this morning, the pound is up. It's trading about 1.34. But certainly, far off of the 145 prior to the vote.
Got it. That's why you're the man. The official financial advisor to the Hurley in the Morning program, Chuck Malamut, continues. If you're just new to the program, Chuck has been doing this program every Tuesday for more than a quarter of a century here with Hurley in the Morning. on WPG 104.1 FM. We're also on the AM band at 1450, where the station has been for decades, and worldwide at WPGTalkRadio.com. Chuck Malamut is the managing director, the leader of his group, the Malamut Group at Morgan Stanley's Northfield office. Give them a call, and you will quickly understand how and why they have perfected their concept of total asset management coupled with the all-important asset allocation. Times like this are the perfect reason why that's such an important quotient. 609-383-2010, 609-383-2010. It's halftime. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Tim Mooney is going to join us on an important charitable cause in about 18 minutes. Dr. Bob Zlotnick in today's fourth quarter. We've already done 4.5 quarters today here at WPG. There was a torrential rainstorm going on that affected all the satellite programming because the rain was just I've not seen it that torrential in a long time. We'll be back with Chuck Malamut in exactly 2 minutes. With Chuck Malamut, the official financial advisor to the Hurley in the Morning program. 35 minutes past the hour. We have 10 minutes uninterrupted with Chuck. We'll take a quick break. At that point, we'll come back with Tim Mooney, who will be presenting a fast-approaching charity event that's right around the corner in the early part of the second week of July. Chuck, I think it's extraordinary that half the year of 2016 is basically in the rearview mirror. How would you size it up?
Well, Harry,
it's a shocker.
Yeah, I mean,
fast.
it's time goes by very, very quickly, and you know, we made a number of predictions, as we do every year, as to what we think will be happening not only domestically but internationally as well. And you kind of take a step back and reevaluate, you know, what's right, what's wrong, and what's indifferent. So,
by the way, truthfully, and that's all you do is speak the truth. Has anything been predictable? I would almost say, as a layperson, I can't think of anything that was predictable this year.
Yeah, there's been a few things, Harry.
Okay.
So let's start with what we talked about was was GDP, and what we basically said is we thought GDP would remain below 3%.
Well, of course.
Nominal GDP below 5% for an unprecedented 10th year in a row. So
never in history.
So our economy has grown at 0.8%.
Fantastic.
For the first quarter. We do, as we've talked about with earnings, we do expect the economy will rebound, as we get into the latter part of this year, somewhat modestly. Fundamentals here in the U.S., we don't think are going to be negatively impacted that much by the Brexit vote. Now, you think about And
I don't.
I know.
I'm laughing only because I don't think we should. I think it's crazy that we are. But I'm glad to hear you say that.
Because you realize, Harry, I'm going to go off script here a little bit. that we are virtually
he knows me.
That we are virtually at full employment.
Yeah, I knew it was coming. That's why I was laughing.
So
it's never before.
And that there's been discussions. As we got through the vote, one of the immediate thoughts, other than the market, going through a fairly massive sell-off, was the fact that the Fed was now going to be on hold for the remainder of this year and going into the early part of 2017. Now, if in fact we do continue to see the job growth increase and unemployment number decrease, and earnings to be decent here in the U.S., it could give the Fed enough ammo.
How much lower could the unemployment rate decrease? And I mean this in a totally respectful, intellectually honest way. We're at 4.7%.
And full employment is what?
Was more than that.
Full employment is less if you're at 5 or less.
Yeah, you're at full employment.
So technically,
we're beyond full employment. So how much lower could it go? I'll tell you what I would like to see. I'd like to see everybody counted. I'd like to see a real number, like if you go to some of those U reports, whatever they are called, U5 or whatever it's called, and see what really the work participation rate is, because I think this really hurts the conversation, because it's really hard to accept that we're better than 95% employment in this country. it doesn't feel that way because it's really not true, and they merely took people out of the workforce in a very short period of time, call them discouraged, and then they don't count them. So it's a shame that honest brokers use dishonest numbers to try to make a narrative on where we're at, because we're not at 4.7% unemployment, Chuck. Any honest broker knows that. It's possibly twice that. But yet this is the conversation that we have.
So let's go through the I think what I'll give you, Harry, is where we have tracked correctly first, okay? S&P earnings make limited headway as consumer spending advances are, offset by oil, the dollar, and wage rates. So, corporate earnings have been weak, Harry, over the past year, but we expect, modest recovery, over the coming quarters. We kind of talked about that a few minutes back. We also spoke about what has happened in the lack of increased valuations within the equity markets. What we thought going into the year, for the first time in over 40 years, U.S. equities experienced a single-digit percentage change for the second year in a row. You think about where we were in 2015. As we mentioned earlier, volatility has been the theme for a good part of this year. Equities basically are pretty much where they were as we started at the beginning of 2016. You will definitely like this one. Geopolitical terrorism and cyber attacks continue to haunt investors, but have little market impact. Okay, so
I think that's an honest stat. I think there's a really intellectually honest reason for that. Unfortunately, it's become the norm, and the markets are not as affected by it. Yeah,
so you take a look. You take a look at the Brexit vote. That's going to obviously throws out a fair amount of uncertainty on a short-term basis. We do expect that our economy here in the U.S. is going to survive the fallout. Might not be the same, globally speaking. We unfortunately witnessed what happened in Orlando recently. Terrorism, unfortunately, has become somewhat common, and the overall markets, if you think about it, used to come under a lot of pressure, and it's been somewhat limited in scope. Another prediction that we chatted about was the federal budget deficit was going to increase in dollars and a percentage of GDP for the first time in 7 years, and federal spending levels are set to rise in 2016. So what we got wrong, it looks like, is what sectors of the S&P were going to perform. We originally thought that information technology, financials, and telecommunications would outperform energy, materials, and utilities. We're on the wrong side of that particular prediction. What has happened is that utilities have been one of the best performers. Telecom has been a very good performer. Tech has been average, and financials, unfortunately, if you take a look year to date, are virtually at the probably the worst performing sector. Questionable items, and I was going to save this to last, but I'm going to throw it out there now. Talk about what's going to happen in November. The prediction that was made was that the Republicans were going to retain the House and the Senate and capture the White House. I'd like to I know you'd like to put a check next to that.
But me, I won't, because I have long forecasted that the Senate is in significant jeopardy, and obviously the White House is as well. So most people are now going to say that Republicans will retain the House but lose some ground, but retain it. I think they would still retain it rather comfortably, but there's going to be some seats that will change there that may not have. The Senate may go to the Democrats, and the White House could go as well, although I consider Trump in a position to actually win the White House also. If he wins all the states that Romney won, and if he can pick up two others that Romney didn't, he's going to win. So all the battleground states are very, very tight. Your research, I'm guessing, shows that has flipped. The Democrats are now favored to win the Senate, correct?
There's a very, very strong possibility
White
that's
House.
going to happen.
Yeah. 2 minutes, because I want to get back on time for Tim Mooney. Something I want us each to do a little homework on, Chuck. I know you would do this anyhow. When most people were asleep, except me, the legislature voted
I saw
to
that.
raise
Yes.
the gas tax by 23 cents.
27 cents, I thought it was.
I think it's 23, but you could be right. I think it's 23, but I'll revisit my my notes on that. I wrote down 23 when I was studying it in the 2 o'clock hour, but I'll check on that. But here's what did also happen, that a lot of people are just saying, oh, my gosh, the gas tax is going up. It's so predictable. We have one low tax, and look at them go. This is kind of historic in a sense. The New Jersey sales tax is going to go from 7% to 6%. So I'm going to run the numbers on this and even factor how many people that don't live here will be paying the user fee, if you will, of buying gas for driving through here and paying the extra 23 cents with the savings that we will all enjoy from going from 7 to 6%. There's got to be something to it. It can't just be a wash, or there'd be no reason to do this. So I'm going to find out what this means. Initially, I don't like it, but I'm not sure yet, Chuck. I want to look at it a little closer.
You know, Harry, where I was disappointed was the fact that the estate tax, abolishing the estate tax, was on the table.
Well, yeah, but the liberals will never think that way. They want to get you in life.
Unfortunately,
they want to get you in death. They want to get you in the afterlife.
Unfortunately, that got thrown out.
Of course.
So as a result, that's going to impact, a lot of people.
What do you think hurts more, paying 23 cents a gallon every time at the pump, or enjoying a 1% reduction on only those purchases that involve New Jersey sales tax? What's your gut tell you? Is this a pitchfork in the eye, or is this a net win? Obviously, the Transportation Trust Fund.
The Transportation Trust Fund, as we talked about, was in dire need.
By the way, did you check? Is it 23? Am I right? You can say I'm right.
No, I'm still looking, Harry.
It's 23.
So
I don't think I would have gotten that wrong.
I will find this out here in a second. I could be, look.
It's 23. It's Brother Harry here.
It's 20-something.
It's 23.
We'll leave it at that. All right.
But it is from 7 to 6.
Oh, definitely, from 7 to 6.
So what do you think about that?
I want to say anytime,
Remember when they put the tax on the boats?
Absolutely.
And this was going to be fantastic. It was going to be utopia. It was going to be nirvana. But then people said, screw you, I'm not paying that. And then they screwed everybody. Remember the luxury tax, the additional tax on the hotels and the motel owners, and Cape May and other areas got crushed? Every good intention, if it has the law of unintended consequences, smash it between the eyes. We had one low tax, and it was the gas tax. And here we go. 23 cents.
You're right. You are right, Harry. 23 cents. I stand corrected.
Chuck, it's what I do, baby.
Okay.
Come on, man. The truth in broadcasting.
So all of your listeners will say, yes, Harry got it right again.
Let me be right, Chuck. Let's leave on that note. Tim Mooney, who you know.
I do know Tim Mooney, yes.
You were his boss. We go all the way back to the opening of the Golden Nugget. Tim Mooney promoting an important charitable event. He's coming up next. You've been listening to Chuck Malamut, and this program is presented weekly by Chuck, a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley. The views and opinions you've heard are those of Chuck's, do not necessarily reflect those of Morgan Stanley or its affiliates. Current as of the date of this broadcast, subject to change without notice. The information provided, nor any opinion you hear, constitutes a solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security. The presentation is for informational purposes only. Morgan Stanley Smith Barney, member SIPC. 10 minutes uninterrupted with Tim Mooney, guy I've known for like 40 years. Coming up next, Chuck, as always.
Harry, thanks for having me.
I give you the big thumbs up as you leave the studio because you're the best in the business. Turn to Chuck. Tell him I sent you. 609-383-2010. We'll be right back.